She had always believed in the power of music. From the moment she first touched a piano as a child, she felt a spark that nothing else could give her. It was not a fancy piano, nor a fancy house. Just an old upright that had scratches and chipped keys, yet it sang under her fingers. Every evening, after a long day of work, she would sit at that piano and let her fingers dance over the keys. In that tiny apartment, the music was her escape. The music was her world. The music was her hope. Life had not been kind to her. She grew up in a small town where opportunities were few and far between. Her family was not poor in the sense of having nothing, but they were always just scraping by. There was never money for lessons, no one to guide her talent professionally. But she had something that money could not buy: determination and a love for what she did. While other kids went out to play, she would sit by the piano, learning by ear, mimicking melodies she heard on the radio, dreaming that one day she could make music that would touch people's hearts. Her days were long and tiring. She worked multiple jobs to support herself, taking shifts at a small cafe in the mornings and cleaning houses in the evenings. Her hands were often sore, her back tired, and some days it felt like the world was pressing down too hard. But every night, no matter how exhausted she was, she found her way back to the piano. Even if it was just for half an hour, even if it was just a simple melody, it was enough to recharge her soul. The music reminded her that there was more to life than bills and chores. There was a world where dreams could exist. One cold winter evening, as she played a soft tune, a thought struck her. There was a small music club in the city that hosted open performances for people to showcase their talent. The club was popular among wealthy patrons, people who judged by appearances and reputation more than actual skill. Most performers there were trained, polished, and confident. She had none of that. She had her music and her heart, and that was it. Yet a spark of courage rose within her. What if she tried? What if she stepped out of her small world and let her music speak to strangers, even strangers who might laugh or doubt her? The next morning, she decided she would go. She prepared herself the best she could. She didn't have fancy clothes, only her simple work outfit, slightly worn but neat. She packed her small bag with sheet music she had written herself, and a few personal notes. She told herself it didn't matter what anyone thought. What mattered was the music, the feeling, and the courage to show it. Her heart pounded as she made her way to the city. The streets were crowded, the wind bit at her cheeks, and every step seemed heavier than the last. Yet, she walked on, driven by something stronger than fear. When she reached the music club, she was struck by the contrast. The building itself was grand, with bright lights and polished glass doors. People in expensive coats and shoes chatted outside, some laughing, some looking at their phones. The music spilling from inside was lively, elegant, and practiced. She felt a moment of doubt, a flicker of fear. She wasn't like them. She didn't belong here. She took a deep breath, clutched her bag tightly, and stepped inside. Inside, the club was even more impressive. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow. Velvet curtains framed the stage, where a grand piano sat, waiting. The tables were filled with people sipping wine and champagne, her eyes scanning the performers with the kind of scrutiny she had never experienced before. She felt small, almost invisible, yet she told herself it didn't matter. She had her music, and that was her voice. The host of the evening approached her. A polite man with a clipboard and a rehearsed smile, she explained that she wanted to perform, her voice soft but steady. He looked her over quickly, raising an eyebrow as if questioning her presence. He scribbled something on his clipboard and nodded, pointing her toward the small waiting area near the stage. She found a quiet corner and sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Every now and then she peeked at the piano, her heartbeat quickening. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of. The moment that terrified her and thrilled her all at once. While waiting, she observed the other performers. They were confident, polished, and composed. Some wore tailored suits. Others had flashy dresses. Their music was practiced, flawless, the kind that came from formal training. She felt a pang of insecurity. Could she really stand among them? Could her simple melodies compete in a place like this? She closed her eyes and let herself breathe. She reminded herself that she had something they didn't: the honesty of her music. The story behind every note she played. Minutes later, her name was called. She stood, her knees trembling slightly, and walked toward the stage. The lights felt bright, the room silent, as everyone's eyes turned toward her. Among them, she noticed one man who caught her attention immediately. He was well-dressed, wearing a tailored suit and a confident expression. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, with a look that seemed amused, almost mocking. She didn't know who he was, only that he seemed to represent the kind of people who would dismiss her at first glance. She took a deep breath and approached the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, feeling the smooth surface beneath them. She closed her eyes and let her memory guide her. Then she began to play. The first notes were tentative, soft, like a whisper. She could hear the subtle shift in the room, a few curious glances, some polite smiles. She didn't falter, though, and slowly her confidence grew. The melody deepened, carrying emotion, telling her story without words. She played what she had felt in her life: the struggles, the small joys, the hope that never left her. As she played, she noticed the man in the suit. His initial amusement faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of surprise. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, as if trying to understand what he was hearing. The music was different from what he expected. It was not perfect in the traditional sense. There were imperfections, yes, small hesitations, but it was real, raw, and beautiful. Her hands moved over the keys with passion, and the room seemed to grow quiet around her. Patrons who had been talking lowered their voices, their attention drawn to the honesty of her playing. She was aware of her surroundings but didn't let them distract her. Every note she played carried a part of her soul. She remembered the nights spent in that small apartment, the long hours of work, the moments when hope felt fragile. She poured all of it into the music, letting it flow freely. The applause she had imagined in her dreams had not come yet, but she didn't need it. This moment, this connection through music, was enough. By the end of her piece, the room was silent for a heartbeat. The kind of silence that carries weight, the kind that makes everyone realize they have witnessed something sincere. Then, slowly, a few hands clapped, then more, until the room filled with genuine applause. The man in the suit, the one who had laughed, now sat with a changed expression. He was no longer amused. He was intrigued. Something about the performance had reached him, something that words could not describe. She stepped back from the piano, her hands still trembling but her heart soaring. She had done it. She had faced doubt, fear, and the unknown, and she had shared her music honestly. She had made them listen, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The experience was unlike anything she had felt before. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to go forward despite it. That night, as she left the club, the cold air brushing her cheeks, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known. Her life had not changed in terms of wealth or comfort, but something deeper had shifted. She had discovered that her music had power, that it could move people, and that she belonged in this world, even if she had once doubted it. The memory of the man in the suit lingered, a reminder that some people may not understand at first, but the truth in what you do can speak louder than skepticism. Walking home under the city lights, she smiled to herself. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt full of possibilities. Her dream, once distant and fragile, now felt tangible. She had taken the first step, and it was more than she could have hoped for. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that the story was only beginning. The next day, she woke with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Her performance at the music club had been a small step, yet it felt monumental. She replayed the moment in her mind, the way the piano had felt under her fingers, the way the room had fallen silent, and the way the applause had finally washed over her. But one memory stood out most vividly: the man in the suit who had laughed at her. She couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something about the way he had looked at her at first, the skepticism in his eyes, and then the subtle shift when he realized she was real talent. She wondered who he was, and more than that, she wondered if he would remember her. her life continued its usual rhythm. She worked her morning shift at the cafe, serving customers with a polite smile, though her mind was often elsewhere. She cleaned houses in the evenings, her hands tired, but her spirit still alive with music. Every spare moment she had, she returned to her piano at home, practicing and creating new melodies. She wrote down notes, trying to capture emotions she had never fully expressed before. Music had become her language, her diary, and her sanctuary all at once. Then, a week later, she received an unexpected invitation. A note slipped under the door of the cafe where she worked, elegantly written, asking if she would consider performing at a private event that weekend. It was from someone calling himself the organizer, mentioning that the audience would include influential people from the city, including a certain gentleman who had been present the night of her performance. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be the man in the suit? She read and reread the note, hardly daring to believe it. But the words were clear. They wanted her music again, and they were willing to pay for it. She spent the next few days preparing. She didn't have a coach, a fancy studio, or expensive instruments. All she had was her old piano and the hours she had spent practicing alone. Yet, she felt a growing confidence. She was not performing for money or recognition, she reminded herself. She was performing for the music, for the joy it brought her, and for the chance to share it with others. She selected a few pieces that spoke from her heart, melodies that told stories of struggle, hope, and triumph. She also created a new piece, something bold and daring, inspired by the courage she had found in herself. When the day of the event arrived, she felt a familiar flutter of nerves. She dressed carefully in the outfit she had prepared, simple yet elegant, not flashy, but enough to show respect for the occasion. She carried her music sheets in a small folder, her hands trembling slightly with anticipation. As she entered the venue, she was struck by the grandeur. The room was decorated with flowers and candles, soft lights casting warm shadows across polished floors. Tables were set with fine china. People mingled in conversations that hummed like distant music. The organizer greeted her with a smile and guided her to the stage. She caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Some had seen her perform at the club. Others were strangers, curious to see this unknown talent. And then she saw him. The man in the suit seated at the center table, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was no laughter this time, no smirk, only a steady gaze. Her stomach tightened. But she drew in a deep breath and reminded herself to focus on the music. She sat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. The room quieted in anticipation, a respectful hush filling the air. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the music before she even played a note. Then, slowly, she began. The first melody was gentle, delicate, like a soft whisper of a dream. She could feel the audience leaning in, their attention caught by the sincerity of the sound. She played with all her heart, letting each note carry emotion, telling a story without words. As she moved into her second piece, her confidence grew. The music became richer, more expressive, flowing with passion and depth. She noticed reactions in the audience, people leaning forward, eyes glistening, some smiling softly. And then she felt the presence of the man in the suit more keenly. His eyes were fixed on her, not with judgment, but with curiosity and admiration. She could feel him measuring every note, trying to understand how someone with so little formal training could evoke such strong feelings. The new piece she had composed was the most daring. It was bold, unpredictable, with moments of quiet vulnerability and bursts of powerful emotion. She poured herself into it completely, letting her hands move with instinct and feeling. The music filled the room, reaching every corner, touching everyone present. There was no room for doubt now. The laughter she had once imagined from skeptics was replaced by awe, by respect. Even the man in the suit leaned forward, his eyes wide, as though the music had reached him in a way that words never could. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, holding the weight of what had just been heard. Then applause erupted, louder and more genuine than she had ever experienced. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, and even calling her name. Her hands shook as she stood, a mix of relief and joy washing over her. She had done it. She had faced a room full of strangers, including the man who had once doubted her, and she had left them moved and inspired. After the performance, the organizer approached her with praise and congratulations. People came to speak with her, offering kind words, asking about her journey, and expressing admiration for her courage and talent. And then, the man in the suit stood before her. He extended his hand, a small smile playing on his lips. "You have a gift," he said simply. His words were direct, yet heavy with meaning. She felt her heart swell, not from pride, but from the recognition that someone who had doubted her now truly understood her talent. They spoke briefly, him asking questions about how she had learned, what inspired her, and how she had continued, despite obstacles. She answered honestly, explaining the nights spent practicing alone, the small victories, the struggles, and the unwavering love for music. He listened intently, nodding, clearly impressed by her resilience and dedication. She realized that this encounter was more than a moment of validation. It was the beginning of a connection that might open doors she had only dreamed of. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about how life had seemed so limiting, how opportunities had appeared scarce, yet here she was, standing in a room full of influential people who had seen her for who she truly was. She realized that courage and persistence were as important as talent. She had risked judgment, faced her fears, and allowed herself to be vulnerable. And in return, she had been seen, heard, and appreciated. For the first time, she felt the weight of possibility. The world no longer seemed so small. She knew there would be challenges ahead, more skeptics to face, and more nights when she would question her path. But she also knew that she had taken a step that could not be undone. She had shared her music with those who mattered, and she had discovered that her passion had the power to connect, to inspire, and to change perceptions. As she reached her small apartment, she sat by her piano and played quietly, letting the events of the evening wash over her. Her fingers moved with ease, the notes flowing like water, smooth and full of life. She smiled, feeling a warmth inside that had nothing to do with the cold outside. The journey was far from over, but she had already proven to herself that she could rise to the challenge. And in that moment, she knew that no amount of skepticism or doubt could ever diminish the music inside her. She had faced laughter, doubt, and judgment, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more determined than ever. The story was just beginning. She was ready for the chapters yet to come. The days after her performance were filled with an energy she had never felt before. The note from the organizer had led to a chain of invitations, small performances at private gatherings, a few interviews for local publications, and even an offer to play for a charity event. Each opportunity, though modest in scope, filled her with excitement and nervous anticipation. She still worked her usual jobs, cleaning houses and waiting tables, but now there was a sense of purpose behind each day. She was no longer simply surviving. She was preparing for something bigger, something that felt like it could change her life. She spent hours every day practicing. Her piano had become more than an instrument. It was her companion, her teacher, and her confidant. She worked on pieces she already knew, refining them, giving them depth and emotion. She also experimented with new compositions, trying to capture the experiences she had lived through. Some pieces were soft and introspective, like the quiet moments when she felt alone with her thoughts. Others were bold and energetic, reflecting the fire that had kept her going through hard times. Every note she played, every melody she created, was a reflection of her journey. She poured herself into each one completely. Her mind often wandered back to the man in the suit. She didn't know his name, but she remembered his eyes, the way they had shifted from amusement to genuine interest. She wondered what he thought of her now, if he remembered the performance, and whether he would consider her talent as extraordinary as she hoped. The thought made her nervous and excited at the same time. She knew she could not rely on his recognition alone, but the idea that someone of influence had noticed her sparked a new level of determination. One afternoon, she received a formal invitation to perform at an event hosted by the man in the suit himself. The letter was elegant, precise, and unmistakably exclusive. It spoke of a gathering for a select audience, people who valued art, culture, and talent. And it requested her presence to play at the piano. Her hands shook as she held the envelope. This was not just another performance. It was an opportunity to show that her music had the power to captivate even those accustomed to the finest entertainment. She felt a mixture of fear and excitement, but she knew she could not pass this chance by. In preparation, she pushed herself harder than ever. She practiced long hours, often losing track of time, making notes in the margins of her music sheets, trying variations, and experimenting with expression. She wanted to play with a combination of technical skill and emotion, a balance that could reach even the most critical listeners. Her apartment became a workshop for creativity, each day a step toward a performance that she hoped would leave a mark. She also rehearsed controlling her nerves, imagining herself sitting at the grand piano, facing a room full of strangers and the man whose skepticism had once been so apparent. The day of the event arrived, and she dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was elegant yet understated. She wanted to appear confident, not showy, to let her music speak for itself. As she entered the venue, she felt the familiar mixture of awe and nervousness. The hall was magnificent, with crystal chandeliers casting light over polished wooden floors. Guests mingled with soft laughter and polite conversation, all dressed in their finest attire. The grand piano awaited on the stage, its surface gleaming under the lights, almost as if it knew it was about to witness something special. The organizer greeted her warmly and guided her backstage. She glimpsed faces in the audience, people she did not know, all of them seated and ready. Then she saw him, the man in the suit, sitting at the center table, watching her approach. There was no smirk, no hint of amusement. His expression was calm, yet intense, as though he were carefully observing every movement she made. She felt her pulse quicken, a tangle of nerves and excitement. But she focused on her breathing and reminded herself that she had the music, and the music was hers. Sitting at the piano, she let her hands hover over the keys. The room grew silent, attentive, and expectant. She closed her eyes and let the music begin in her mind before her fingers moved. The first notes were soft, cautious, but deliberate. Each sound carried her story, a tale of struggle, hope, and perseverance. She allowed the music to flow naturally, unhurried, letting her fingers find their own rhythm. As the melody filled the room, she noticed the reactions around her. Heads turned, conversations stopped, eyes focused on her as though they were drawn by the honesty of her performance. She moved into her second piece, more confident now, letting her emotions guide the music. The dynamic shifted from soft to bold, from introspective to exuberant. She imagined her life in the notes, the long hours of work, the quiet moments at home with her piano, the fears she had overcome, and the dreams that had kept her moving forward. The audience felt it too, a wave of connection spreading from her fingers to their hearts. Even the man in the suit, who had seemed unshakable, leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her, a flicker of admiration crossing his face. Her final piece was one she had composed herself, something daring and full of emotion. She had worked on it tirelessly, each note carefully chosen, yet allowed for moments of improvisation that let her heart speak freely. As she played, she felt a sense of liberation, a release of all the tension, doubt, and fear that had accompanied her for so long. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience with it, moving them in ways words never could. The room seemed to breathe with her, silent yet alive, hanging on every note. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, there was a brief pause, a quiet that held the weight of the moment. Then applause erupted, filling the room with sound. It was louder, more heartfelt, and more genuine than anything she had ever experienced. People rose to their feet, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling broadly. She stood, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and overwhelming joy. She had given them her music, her story. They had responded not to polish or appearance, but to authenticity and passion. The man in the suit approached her afterward. There was no fanfare, no pretense, just a simple, sincere acknowledgement. "You are extraordinary," he said quietly, yet his words carried weight. She felt a warmth in her chest, not from ego, but from the realization that someone who had once doubted her had recognized her talent. They spoke briefly, exchanging thoughts about her music, her inspirations, and her journey. He asked questions with genuine curiosity, and she answered honestly, sharing the nights of practice, the sacrifices, and the unrelenting love for her craft. As the evening concluded, she left the venue feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The city streets felt alive beneath her feet, the lights twinkling like stars that had come to witness her music. She walked slowly, savoring the victory of having faced her fears and emerged stronger. She knew this was more than a performance, it was proof that perseverance, passion, and authenticity could break through skepticism and expectation. In the quiet of her apartment later that night, she sat by her piano and played softly. Each note reminded her of the journey she had taken, the early mornings, the late nights, the doubts, and the moments of quiet hope. She realized that the applause, the recognition, and even the admiration from the man in the suit were only part of the reward. The true reward was the knowledge that she had trusted herself, shared her voice, and touched the hearts of others. Her journey was far from over, but she felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to embrace whatever came next with courage and confidence. Music had led her this far, and she knew it would guide her even further, carrying her into a future full of possibility and promise. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind. Invitations arrived almost daily, each one presenting new audiences, new stages, and new challenges. She was beginning to understand that her music was no longer something private, something that belonged only to her apartment and her dreams. It was a language that could reach others, even strangers, and even those who had once doubted her abilities. Yet amid all the excitement, she remained humble, careful to remember where she had started, and the long nights that had shaped her passion. One evening, she received another invitation from the millionaire himself. This time, it was for a private event in his mansion, a gathering of a few influential people who valued art and talent deeply. The letter was formal, precise, and elegant, requesting her presence to play the piano. She felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation as she prepared. She chose a dress that was simple but graceful, wanting to convey respect and professionalism without drawing attention away from the music itself. Arriving at the mansion, she was awed by its grandeur. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, walls adorned with paintings, and elegant furniture arranged with meticulous care. Guests mingled with soft laughter and conversation, dressed in their finest attire. It was a world far removed from her small apartment and simple life, a world that had seemed inaccessible until recently. Yet she reminded herself that the music was what mattered, not the surroundings, and she carried herself with quiet determination. The host greeted her warmly, guiding her to the stage where a grand piano awaited. She noticed the millionaire at the center of the room, seated with calm authority, his expression neutral but attentive. There was no laughter, no skepticism this time, only focus. She felt her nerves settle slightly. She had faced doubt before, she had faced judgment, and now she had the chance to perform in a space where her talent could speak for itself. Sitting at the piano, she let her hands hover above the keys, taking a deep breath. The audience fell silent, the anticipation palpable. She began with a soft melody, one that reflected her journey so far, the struggles, the perseverance, the quiet hope that had carried her through difficult times. Each note was deliberate, each pause meaningful. She played not just with her fingers, but with her heart, allowing the emotion to flow through every chord. As the piece progressed, she felt the room respond. Eyes softened, heads tilted, and she noticed subtle nods of appreciation. The music created a connection, a bridge between her experiences and the audience's emotions. Even the millionaire's expression shifted slightly, a trace of admiration and curiosity appearing as he listened. She could feel that he was fully present, absorbing every nuance, and she allowed that presence to fuel her performance. Her second piece was more expressive, more dynamic. She moved seamlessly between quiet, introspective passages and bold, powerful moments that filled the room with sound. The music carried her story, moments of vulnerability, bursts of courage, and the resilience that had defined her journey. She was aware of the reactions around her, subtle but meaningful smiles, quiet gasps, and the way some guests leaned forward, drawn into the melody. She realized that music had a unique power. It could reach people in ways words never could. Then came her final piece, one that she had composed specifically for this occasion. It was daring and emotive, filled with the energy of someone who had fought to be heard. She had worked tirelessly on this piece, refining every note, imagining herself sharing her story through the piano. As she played, she felt a liberation, a release of all the fears and doubts she had carried. The music surged, ebbing and flowing, reflecting the highs and lows of her journey. It was bold, heartfelt, and honest. The room was silent when she lifted her hands from the keys, the weight of the performance hanging in the air. Then applause erupted, a wave of sound that seemed to shake the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their admiration genuine. She felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. She had shared her music fully, and it had resonated with every listener. Even the millionaire, who had once doubted her, now stood with an expression of genuine respect. His eyes held recognition and awe, a silent acknowledgement of her talent and dedication. After the performance, he approached her. "Your music is remarkable," he said, his voice steady yet sincere. He asked about her inspirations, her process, and how she had managed to develop such skill without formal training. She spoke openly, sharing the long hours of practice, the challenges she had faced, and the determination that had driven her. He listened intently, clearly impressed by her resilience and honesty. It was a conversation filled with mutual respect, one that left her feeling valued and understood. The event concluded with guests praising her performance and expressing interest in hearing more of her music in future gatherings. She realized that this was not just a moment of recognition, but the beginning of a new chapter. Doors that had once seemed closed were opening, and she felt a growing confidence in her abilities and her path. She had faced skepticism, judgment, and doubt, and had emerged stronger and more determined. As she walked home that night, she reflected on the journey so far. Music had been her refuge, her companion, and her voice, but now it had become a bridge to the wider world. She understood that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and authenticity were equally important. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that she had stayed true to herself and her music, and that others were beginning to recognize its value. Back in her apartment, she sat by her piano, playing softly to unwind from the intensity of the evening. Each note carried memories of the journey, the challenges, the triumphs, the moments of quiet hope. She felt gratitude for every experience that had led her to this point. She knew there would be more obstacles ahead, more skeptics to face, and more nights of doubt. But she also knew that she had the strength to continue. The music within her was powerful, and she had learned that sharing it with courage could create connections and opportunities she had once only dreamed of. That night, as she finally rested, she felt a sense of calm and anticipation. She had faced judgment and emerged stronger. She had touched the hearts of strangers, and she had gained the respect of someone who had once doubted her. Her journey was far from over, but she felt ready to embrace the next chapter. Music had led her to this point, and she trusted it would guide her further, opening doors, inspiring others, and allowing her to continue growing both as a musician and as a person. The story she had begun in quiet solitude was now unfolding on a stage far larger than she had imagined, and she was ready to step fully into the possibilities that awaited. Life after her performance at the Millionaire's mansion took on a new rhythm. Invitations to perform poured in, each one offering her a chance to share her music with audiences that she could have never imagined reaching before. She still maintained her everyday responsibilities, working her shifts at the cafe and cleaning homes. But now there was a spark of excitement, a sense that she was moving towards something greater. Every step of her routine reminded her that her music had the power to open doors and touch lives in ways she had only dreamed of. She practiced daily, dedicating herself to refining her pieces and experimenting with new compositions. Her piano became a tool not just for expression, but for connection. Each day she discovered more depth in her music, more ways to convey emotions that words could never capture. She composed melodies inspired by the people she met, the stories she heard, and the experiences she lived. Her music was growing richer, more mature, and full of feeling. She found joy in knowing that each note she played could create an impact far beyond her small apartment. The man in the suit, a friend and mentor in many ways, remained a presence in her journey. He introduced her to opportunities she had never known existed. Offering guidance and insight into the world of music she was just beginning to explore. He admired her persistence and authenticity, often reminding her that her unique voice was her greatest asset. Through his support, she learned that talent alone could take a person far, but perseverance, humility, and a willingness to learn would carry them even further. One afternoon, she received an invitation to perform at a prestigious city concert hall, a venue she had once considered unreachable. The thought of playing in such a grand space filled her with both excitement and nerves. She spent hours preparing, practicing every piece meticulously, and imagining the audience before her. She reminded herself that this was not just about recognition or fame, it was about sharing her music, telling her story through sound, and connecting with listeners on a deep level. On the day of the concert, she arrived early, taking in the grandeur of the hall. Its polished floors, the towering stage, and the seats stretching into the distance. She walked through the corridors backstage, feeling a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. Her dress was simple yet elegant, reflecting her personality and her respect for the occasion. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of every step she had taken to reach this moment. The journey had been long, but she had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable with each challenge she had faced. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience's attention turned to her. She noticed familiar faces, people who had seen her perform before, but also many new faces, strangers waiting to be moved by her music. Among them, she spotted the man in the suit, seated with a calm expression, his eyes reflecting pride and curiosity. His presence was reassuring, a reminder that the path she had chosen, though difficult, had led her to remarkable places. Sitting at the grand piano, she let her hands hover over the keys. The silence of the hall was profound, as though the audience collectively held its breath. She began with a gentle melody, soft and inviting, drawing listeners into the world she created through her music. Each note carried emotion, telling stories of perseverance, hope, and dreams that refused to fade. The audience was captivated, leaning forward, her eyes reflecting the connection they felt to the music as she moved to her second piece. The melody grew bolder, more expressive. She allowed herself to take risks, to play with emotion that transcended technical skill. She poured every experience, every struggle, and every triumph into the music, letting it guide her hands and heart. The hall seemed to breathe with her, each chord resonating with the listeners, moving them in ways words never could. She noticed subtle reactions, smiles, nods, and even tears as the audience responded to the honesty of her performance. Her final piece was one she had composed specifically for this concert, a culmination of her journey thus far. It was bold, intricate, and full of raw emotion. She played with intensity, letting the music carry her story to every corner of the hall. She had worked tirelessly on this piece, perfecting each note, but allowing for improvisation that let her feelings shine through. The audience was spellbound, completely absorbed in the narrative she wove through sound. Even the man in the suit leaned forward, his expression a mixture of pride and admiration, silently acknowledging the growth and talent she had displayed. When she lifted her hands from the piano at the conclusion, there was a brief pause, a moment of quiet reverence, before the audience erupted into applause. The sound was overwhelming, a mixture of clapping, cheering, and standing ovations that filled the hall with energy. She felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, joy, and gratitude, all intertwined. She had shared herself fully through her music, and the audience had responded with sincerity and appreciation. After the performance, many approached her, expressing admiration and asking about her journey. She shared her story with honesty, speaking of the long hours of practice, the small apartment where it all began, and the challenges she had overcome. She spoke of the importance of perseverance, passion, and authenticity, hoping to inspire others to pursue their dreams despite obstacles. The man in the suit remained by her side, introducing her to influential figures in the music world and offering guidance for the next steps in her career. In the days that followed, her life began to transform. Offers to perform at larger venues, invitations to collaborate with other musicians, opportunities to teach and mentor young talent all came her way. She remained grounded, remembering her humble beginnings, the nights spent practicing alone, and the dreams that had fueled her journey. She approached each opportunity with gratitude and determination, ensuring that her music remained authentic and that she stayed true to herself. Through it all, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. Talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and authenticity were essential. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and judgment, yet had continued to pursue her passion. Each challenge had strengthened her. Each setback had taught her resilience. And each success had reminded her of the power of determination. Her music had become more than a personal refuge, was a voice, a bridge to others, and a testament to the rewards of dedication and heart. One evening, as she sat at her piano in the quiet of her apartment, she realized how far she had come. The journey that had begun with simple melodies in a small room had grown into a life full of purpose and connection. She played softly, each note carrying memories of the struggles, triumphs, and moments of hope that had shaped her path. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had taken risks, followed her dreams, and shared her gift with the world. Looking ahead, she knew that her story was still unfolding. There would be more challenges, more stages, and more opportunities to grow. Yet she felt ready, confident in her ability to face whatever came next. The music within her was a guiding force. She trusted it to lead her toward new experiences, new connections, and new heights. She had learned that laughter, doubt, and skepticism could be transformed into recognition, respect, and opportunity when met with courage, perseverance, and authenticity. As she closed her eyes and let her fingers drift across the keys, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long, filled with obstacles and uncertainty, but it had also been rich with discovery, growth, and joy. She had shared her music with the world, touched hearts, and inspired others through her story. And in that moment, she understood that her dream, once distant and fragile, had become a reality shaped not only by talent, but by determination, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the power of her music. The future was bright, full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms and an open heart.